I was there for that convention speech in 2004, and I spoke to him actually the first time I met him the next day at a lunch that the Newsweek editors were having. The fascinating thing about that speech, apart from the fact that it was a great speech, was that it shut everybody up in the convention hall because they just talk all the time. And you could hear, especially in these keynote speeches, you could hear all the conversation just suddenly fade away as this man commanded the room. And he was totally unknown. So the interesting thing was that he gave this wonderful speech, an impressive delivery, a total unknown. In theory, his message of unity was perfect for that convention because John Kerry, advised by Bob Schramm, was trying to say, we're going to be positive. Voters, independent voters don't want us to go on the attack, even though we all hate Bush. And he was this guy, the most visible symbol of diversity for the party, and giving this incredible speech about uniting red and blue America. The next day, and actually around the same time, the thing that we as journalists were most interested in was that he was opposed to the war. And that was something that John Kerry wasn't prepared to say. In fact, it was actually quite difficult to understand whether John Kerry was for the war, against the war, which bit that he didn't agree with. And this is a mark of the guy's skill. A state senator out of Illinois opposed the war, but deftly sidestepping every question that every national reporter could throw at him about, did he support John Kerry? Did he not? And his answer was some artful response about, well, I was opposed to the war, but I didn't have all the intelligence. When it came back to the primaries, that was exactly what Hillary Clinton threw back at him, saying, well, given the chance to say you opposed the war, you hedged too. So it's funny how what seemed like political genius at the time also came back to bite him. I talked to just about everybody involved in the planning for his campaign, and there were no serious plans. There may have been an ambition at some stage to be president. I have no doubt about that. But there's a huge difference between wanting to be president and actually putting the pieces together, because it's so enormously challenging. Without a name, without a network, without money. We had a rapport, certainly. I wouldn't count myself as a friend. I think there's something opaque and hidden about him, actually, and reserved, in some ways quite British. And that's, in a way, why I wanted to write the book. There was this question about who is Barack Obama, and people on the right would say this is a sort of spooky type of thing. What's he trying to hide? It's also relevant because he had a very thin resume before running. But this kind of withdrawal, this hiding yourself away, intrigued me, and I thought he needed to have his story told by someone other than him.
Bill Ayres, I know very well, and I've known him for about 20 or 30 years. He's a Weather Underground character, and I came to know him because I knew Kathy Boudin's father, and Kathy Boudin was another Weather Underground person who's just come out after 21 years in jail. And I mean, Ayres was potentially extremely dangerous, but very, very close to Obama. Closer, I think, than people like to admit. Well, lived in the same street, operated in the same quadrant. You know, you say he only popped round sort of occasionally, but
well. No question they moved in the same circles and sat on a board together. Was he a friend? Was he a confidant? I'm not sure that he was a confidant, but they certainly knew each other pretty well. What's interesting, well, this tells you how sensitive they were. I was in the room where it was a school gym where Obama was voting on election day. And as I described in this book, this schlubby guy walks in, and I'm looking at him thinking, that's familiar, and I really know nobody who lives here. And I lean over to someone sitting next to me, and I say, isn't that Bill Ayres? And suddenly, all the reporters go crazy. And I have to tell you, the reaction from campaign headquarters, that A, that he was there, B, that I'd been the one who identified him. I mean, they were pretty furious. And they made the joke, one of them quipped that it was the bar in Star Wars at the end of, that this was a sort of freak show that was going on. The danger here was that Bill Ayers, although he'd become this sort of education expert.
A guru, a real guru. I mean, very, very accomplished fellow.
Was that he would make Obama seem radical, which actually he really isn't.
But actually, Jeremiah Wright was far more dangerous.
Far more dangerous.
And Obama knew full well what Jeremiah Wright represented. And actually, oddly enough, if you deconstruct what Wright said, much of it was pretty well true. The only problem was the way he said it.
The way he said it. Well, yes.
I mean, that's often the case, isn't it?
You know, he knew that Wright was explosive. His friends knew that Wright was a ticking time bomb. He asked his staff to, as I tell in the book, to go research all the sermons and find out what was going on.
Sermons he'd sat through for 20 years.
Well, sermons, yeah, but the thing is that he actually hadn't been to church as much as he pretended. And he was a man who...
I was caught between I am a church-going person, but I've never listened to the sermons.
Right,
yeah.
right. How do you explain that? How do you say... I've written a whole chapter in my book, The Audacity of Hope, about how Democrats need to understand churchgoers and how I'm a member of this church. But actually, most Sundays for the last 4 or 5 years, or even more, I've been campaigning for votes in various churches around the state and not going to my own. They were really embarrassed by that. But look, he knew that Wright was politically provocative and had a way with words that was outrageous. I mean, all his friends would say, look, the point about Wright being outrageous was that if he was outrageous, then whatever was going on in your life on the south side of Chicago would seem less out of the norm. So that was the culture of the church, politically connected, culturally sophisticated, and Wright's extremely erudite, but especially when it comes to Jewish interests, for instance, really quite offensive, never mind what he says about terrorism. The online thing is interesting. They've never found a way to really control that or use it with all the constrictions that you have in the White House. So certain political activities have to be kept at a distance. The technology doesn't work in the same way. I mean, it really is, they're working with pretty basic Dell computers as opposed to what they had. Not that it's that sophisticated to run this kind of thing. I think their immediate concept was that they needed to run Washington expertly. So he had to transition from being the outsider to being an insider very quickly, which is why you end up with a White House chief of staff like Rahm Emanuel, the consummate insider, been in the White House, knows how to run things in the House of Representatives. But that's a very different spirit. And they neglected it, quite honestly. The pattern of falling behind, losing the message war, and then having Obama himself rescue them with a big speech is one that they repeated time and again through the campaign. He did it early in the primaries, he did it late in the primaries, he did it through the general election, he did it with Reverend Wright, pretty much over and over again, and he's done it in the White House. And it comes back to, I think, this image that one of his friends told me about, that he is, in basketball terms, a fourth quarter player, and it's the last minute of the fourth quarter when he really steps up his game, because there's something deeply competitive about him that sets aside the policy wonkishness, the multiple focus that he has, and that's when he brings out the best.